Hello, I'm Rodney Rushing. I'm going to give you a little history on the Rushing Cemetery as we know it. It had its beginning about 1865, according to a deed we found in 2010. For many years we did not have a deed for the cemetery. Different people that owned the property tried to take the land a time or two, but they were not paying taxes on it, so we knew it had been deeded out. But anyway, in 2010 we came up with a deed dated 1865 by a man of name, his last name was Kerr. He and his wife had deeded this property to the trustees of Ephraim Owen Rushing, John W. Hinkle, and Thomas Ross to be trustees of the cemetery. But evidently this deed got into E.O. Rushing's trunk and wound up with some descendants in Oklahoma. And we found this deed in 2010, and it was deeded the 1 acre of land for school and all denominations of church purposes is what the deed was made to. At this time, there was no cemetery there. Then about 1888, the first grave was put in the Rushing Cemetery, and it was Linda Bloodworth. She was a young girl, I don't know at what age, and that was the first grave put near the old log church that was in the cemetery. And then, so it actually had its beginning about 1888 with really, the deed doesn't say cemetery, but it's that exact property that was given for school and church purposes. The old log house was used for school and church purposes, mainly General Baptist and Primitive Baptist, sort of shared the church there for some time. And then in later years, the old school and church burned, and I'll discuss a little bit more of that when we get in the cemetery. But anyway, that's a little bit of the early history of the Rushing Cemetery, and we'll discuss it more in detail. I'd like to show you a picture of this deed, most specifically the seal. They drew a hand seal. They didn't have stamps back then. So I took this into the clerk's office, didn't know if they'd accept a hand seal, but they said yes, they would accept a hand seal. And this was only the second one in the history of the county that they had filed with a hand seal. So I'd like this time to take a close-up picture of the hand seal. I'm Rodney Rushing. I'm on the Rushing Cemetery Board that sees after the upkeep of the cemetery. I'd like to give you a few facts about the history of the cemetery. The cemetery was established in about 1888. The first person to be buried in here was a young lady, Linda Bloodworth, and she was here. It was originally a church here before the cemetery, and she was buried out near the church. Eventually the log church was burned, and it became a cemetery. There's 400 plus graves in the cemetery. I don't know the exact number, but quite a few over 400, I'm sure. There is 60 veterans buried in this cemetery from the Civil War on up to the present time. The graves were hand dug originally for a lot of years, on up into the 50s, I would say, where they had to dig the graves by hand with picks and shovels and crowbars, and they then let the caskets down with 2 ropes and 4 men to put the graves down in there. The last grave to be hand dug was for Clarence Hinesley. This was on up after all graves were dug with backhoe. The most numerous names in here is Rushings. I guess there's more Rushings in this area here and on up that way. And the second largest number of names would be Berry, and then followed pretty close by Green. Then there's a lot of other names here that I won't mention. But anyway, I'd like to move and show you just a few of the graves of the earlier people of Civil War and some others right now. The tall monument here is Ephraim Owen Rushing. He was one of the first settlers in this part of the country. He established the post office over here in 1884, and he fought in the Union Army from Southern Illinois. He fought the Battle of Vicksburg, and I'll show you later John Hinkle's grave, who fought for the Confederate Army, and they're both my two great-grandfathers. And they moved in down here and they lived about a mile apart. So I don't think they ever discussed the war very much, but eventually one of the sons married the daughter of the other one. And that's where we come down to, is my grandfathers and so forth. And we'll go now over and take a look at John Hinkle's monument. This is my great-grandfather John Hinkle that built the log cabin at the county line, which is still standing today, that you can see as you drive down number 9 south. Clarence Hinesley is buried in that grave right there. That was the last hand-dug grave in the cemetery. And then his son that dug it is right up in this stone just above that. This cemetery has been here a long time. A lot of these graves you see up here are unidentified. We have no idea who's buried there. But we have a plat here that lists a lot of them. We do know some of the unmarked ones here. This small stone here is the famous Jim Berry that's been a lot of writing done about. He's the one that killed the Jayhawker down on Tick Creek some years there during or after the Civil War. There's been a lot of stories written, some true and some not true, but he's pretty famous for that one thing. He was only 14 years of age at the time. He was not old enough to be in the war, so he was in what they called a home guard, and he killed Bill Dark while he was raiding a lady's house down on Tick Creek. Here's a monument for Herbert Taylor and Shirley Taylor, his wife. Herbert Taylor left here during the Depression. Times were tough when he was 16 years old. He ran off, caught a freight train out of Shirley, and wound up eventually in California, and was very successful out there. Had orange groves and had some eating system set up in California at one time. But anyway, he made a rather generous donation to this cemetery to help us fence it and do a lot of other things here that need to be done. And he did rather well for himself. And he's a great grandson of Ephraim Owen Rushing that we just talked about here before. And we really appreciate the help he's been for our cemetery. Thank you.